All right, welcome in. I'm the Kodiak, and today I'm here to turn down my microphone just a little bit. All right, I'm here to talk about every team's worst starter heading into the year of 2024. But before I get into it, I just want to say, leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe if you're not already. Make sure to check out some of my other videos. I've been doing rankings for every team all offseason long, so you can check out a video where I rank GMs, where I ranked head coaches going into next year, and I'm going to be doing many more of these, so make sure to subscribe. You can always wait until the end. Hopefully I'll have earned it, and let's get right into it. So we're going to start out with a complete layup and a complete gimme. This guy may legit be one of the worst offensive linemen I've ever seen. He belongs in the same conversation as Eric Flowers, as Michael Schofield, as all those terrible offensive linemen we've been accustomed to seeing. Like Andre Dillard is a name that's going to come up in that conversation as well. But for Evan Neal, he just strikes me as a player who got millions of dollars in his bank account and played in the New York market and had no idea how to proceed, and just forgot that you actually have to put the work in the NFL to still be a successful individual playing pro football at the highest level. Now, like I said, he was probably the easiest choice on this whole list, and I understood the pick at the time. We all knew where they were going. We were all just like, okay, they drafted Kayvon Thibodeau at 5, then you can draft a tackle to go opposite Andrew Thomas at 7. Great. Doesn't matter if it's Ekwonu, doesn't matter if it's Cross, doesn't matter if it's Neal. And then they chose Neal, and look at where it got them. Now, I will say, Ekwonu and Cross haven't necessarily played up to their draft stock either. But at the same time, when you use top 7 capital on an offensive tackle, they should never be this bad. And he has a condescending mentality towards fans and criticism in general. He says that the people criticizing him are people who flip burgers and flip hot dogs. Like, no, the people who criticize you, if you want to think they work at McDonald's or whatever, that's fine. But they don't work at McDonald's. They work at Chick-fil-A. I know a guy who hates Evan Neal, and he works at Chick-fil-A. So, yeah, you're wrong about that, buddy. Emmanuel Forbes. Now, he did not receive much coaching during his rookie year, but I'll admit, nothing about his rookie year I was actually very impressed by, and has a lot of potential going forward for Emmanuel Forbes because he is so small, to the point where there's a non-zero chance that he's just not an impact player in the league. He had some disastrous performances. Like, I'm pretty sure he was matched up on DJ Moore when DJ Moore had like his 8 catch for like 250 yards and 3 touchdown game. And I never really understood the pick, especially with Christian Gonzalez there, and Brian Branch even then would have also been a better pick. And I was high on Forbes coming out, but I didn't like him before either of those guys. And he plays in a very tough wideout division, so that's going for him. That's going against him as well. He's going to need to get better to match up on CD. He's going to be better to match up on AJ Brown, and now Malik Neighbors. And you also have great guys there like Devontae Smith, and I'm sure there's going to be many more added throughout Emmanuel Forbes' time with the Washington Commanders. Now, what I will say, Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera did not give him that big of a chance to succeed as an NFL player. Like, that's just the reality of the situation, because that's easily a bottom 1 coaching staff in the league entering last year. Or maybe Frank Reich and what he had going on in Carolina was even worse. But regardless, never really understood the pick to begin with. He's like 160 pounds, so when you're matched up against wide receivers that are 60 pounds heavier than you, you already know that it's probably not a good thing. So he needs to put on some weight, and he just needs to get better in a lot of areas in general. He was advertised as a ball hawking corner when he was coming out, but he hasn't really been a ball hawker either. So, yeah. Eagles, we are going to go with Devin White, the inside linebacker. So, I don't really understand the rationale for NFL executives and why these people still give top 10 votes positionally to players like Devin White. Because if you see like the top 10 personnel rankings, you'll notice that Devin White was ranked in, he got a vote for being one of the top 10 inside off-ball linebackers in the league. And there's a lot of really, really good off-ball linebackers. So I'm surprised that somebody used their vote on Devin White. And he was the second lowest graded running back in run support last year. Linebacker, not running back, in run support, and 7th worst in pass coverage. Now, what I was about to say is he started out as a running back. He literally entered LSU as a running back, but then transitioned to inside linebacker later on in his college career. He ended up being a 5th overall pick in 2019 by Tampa Bay, and I think playing next to Levante David really masked a lot of his flaws, and it's not going to get any easier, because if you can't succeed playing right next to Levante David, who are you going to succeed playing next to. And this was a really interesting ad, especially for a team that has always had a tendency to struggle at the linebacker position. Like, they were really, really bare last year as far as depth and everything like that. But definitely not the player that he was touted as entering the league. Still has some work to do, still can develop. If I remember correctly, he is still decently young, so there is room for him to improve. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like he can't get better, and I'm not going to pretend like Fangio can't coach him up, and he can't be eventually what he was supposed to when he was coming out of LSU because of how highly of a linebacker he was touted. By the way, highest drafted inside linebacker ever, and he just hasn't played up to that whatsoever, not even a little bit. Ezekiel Elliott with the Dallas Cowboys. So I know that a lot of people now are typing in the comment section down below, and my response to that is you just need to get out of like 2018 or whatever, because Ezekiel Elliott, his days of being one of the best running backs in the league are completely over. And the Cowboys, they have the worst running back unit in the NFL by a long shot. And he was on a really bad Patriots offense last year. And yes, the offensive line for the New England Patriots was very bad last year. The scheme was bad. Everything surrounding that team on the offensive side of the ball was bad. Bill O'Brien was bad. The quarterback play was bad. But Ezekiel Elliott himself, he was also bad. But he can catch passes, and that's pretty much the extent of what he can do for you in the NFL at this point. Maybe he can fall into the end zone if you need a red zone touch or two going to your running back. But Dowdle and Vaughn, I believe, are both more explosive options, especially if you're going to use either one of them in the passing game over Ezekiel Elliott between the 20s. And there are going to be dudes cut in August and September that would be a better running back than Ezekiel Elliott and offer more for the Dallas Cowboys going into next year. So yeah, this feels like they brought him back because of nostalgia, and Jerry Jones brought him back because of loyalty sort of thing. And the Cowboys, skill position wise, they are pretty thin outside of CeeDee Lamb. I know they have Cooks, I know they have Ferguson, but still, they need better depth, and I think they are due for some regression now that Dan Quinn is gone and Mike Zimmer's coming in. So this one's going to be really spicy for some people. Now, if you watch Aaron Rodgers play in 2022, you'll see that physically he's not there anymore, and mentally he's not really there anymore either. And by the time it is week 1 of 2024 and the New York Jets go into San Francisco on Monday Night Football for the final game of week 1 of the opening week, I think we are going to see a very, very different quarterback from what we are accustomed to with the Aaron Rodgers of old. And a lot of people have said, well, don't you think he's going to be better, at least an upgrade over Zach Wilson? And I'm like, okay, he doesn't need to be better than Zach Wilson. Like, that's not what we're setting the bar at. The Jets have legit Super Bowl aspirations. And for a team that got so much hype when they added him, they got Hard Knocks. They got literally everything in the NFL being like, ooh, look at this team. Aaron Rodgers is finally going to a team with a good defense. But here's my biggest issue with them. They do not have any skill position depth, at least that's proven, outside of Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. I do like the fact that they added Mike Williams. Granted, he has had a very difficult time staying healthy throughout his NFL career, and he's had a very difficult time staying healthy, particularly within the past few years. And I do like Malachi Corley, but I feel like he's more of a special teams contributor in 2024 more than anything else. And yeah, they have guys like Gibson and Brownlee, but still, we need to see. This is not a situation where we're just going to assume that he is going to be good again. It's actually the opposite. He needs to win me back, and he should have to win you back too, because what has he shown within the past 20 months? And I'm pretty sure that's even longer. That's more time than, or at least equivalent to the time Deshaun Watson took off because he had his whole legal situation. So when you miss that much time due to a situation like that, the results usually speak for themselves. Now, I'm not expecting cohesion on offense. Once again, coaches are Nathaniel Hackett, Todd Downing, and Carter, 3 of whom ran the worst offenses in the league in 2022, and now they're on the same staff. And Robert Saleh has never had cohesion on the offensive side of the ball. So, moving on to the New England Patriots, Cole Strange, and I didn't really agree with this pick at the time. I thought it was bizarre. And you heard Sean McVay after the 2022 draft kind of take a shot at New England because that was right after they won the Super Bowl. And then a reporter, I think he was like, yeah, so what kind of grade did you have on Cole Strange? And then Sean McVay was like, yeah, if he was there in like the 4th round, yeah, we were definitely going to take him. We really liked him there. And then the Patriots take him 29th overall. So for a guy who has had a lot of disastrous draft picks, like I know every GM has their misses, but Bill Belichick over the past few years has had some guys who literally have made zero contribution to the team. Think about N'Keal Harry. Think about Cole Strange now. And he did tear his patellar tendon in his left knee, so I do hope he gets better, and I genuinely hope that he can recover from that. And year one, you pretty much need to be at least an average starter if you are an interior offensive line, because interior offensive line, it's a position that doesn't get heavily invested draft capital-wise into, but when you have one, like you just saw what happened with Quinn Miners, they extended him for 4 years and $80 million. So Cole Strange, he did not show out his rookie year. He also struggled last year. Like, I genuinely believe he was an asset in the run game, but as far as pass protection, like, man, this entire line was just a complete disaster, and Cole Strange was no exception. So yeah, didn't like this pick. Got absolutely robbed in a trade down with the Chiefs. They threw 29 and a 4th round pick, and you know, you could have had McDuffie, who's probably a better asset, inarguably a better asset than Cole Strange. So yeah, staying in the AFC East and going with these trash offensive linemen, we are going to go with Liam Eichenberg. Hold on, I'm going to shrink my camera so that you guys can actually see the guy's position. There we go. All right, I don't need to take up the full screen. So once again, this is company of Eric Flowers, Evan Neal, Michael Schofield, and now Liam Eichenberg. And my thing is he even a starter anymore? Because I know they added Brewer from Tennessee, and I know that Tennessee ended up having to replace their center position this offseason with Cushenberry. So is Liam Eichenberg a starter? I mean, I don't think so. I just remember him always whiffing on blocks, and for a guy playing in the AFC East in a division with Quinnen Williams, in a division with Christian Barmore, you need to be able to have good interior pass protection. And if you watch the Dallas Cowboys blitz the Dolphins last year in their late season matchup, you'll notice that they went after Eichenberg at center all the time. They literally put Parsons right on him, and they did not have an answer for a lot of the game. And for a quarterback that doesn't have a lot of mobility, like Tua doesn't have that much mobility to begin with, you need a great offensive line to keep him upright. And honestly, McDaniel doesn't seem like a guy who wants to overly invest into the offensive line position. I think he'd just rather get his speedsters, and they'd rather just go with edge rushers and maybe even corners. I think he really believes in like the positional hierarchy and where you should spend premium draft capital and where you shouldn't spend a lot of draft resources and, you know, allocate a lot of cap space and or picks. But even then, O-line just never looks like it's a very, very high priority on his list. So, hey, I mean, more power to you, but it's going to be imperative and very important for Armstead to stay healthy this year for the Miami Dolphins. Now, going to Buffalo, we have Von Miller, the edge rusher, and unfortunately, he is not the same player at this point in his career. He is suffering from off-field drama, and he was just like, wow, I can't believe you guys don't know that I wasn't supposed to be playing last year, and you guys all thought I sucked. And I didn't really like that statement, because he should have said something like, yeah, I did everything I could, and I know that I wasn't out there. I know I wasn't, you know, my former self. I know that I'm not really what I used to be, but, you know, I really tried. Instead, last year during the preseason, he said that he was going to play. He said that he was going to be ready for the season. So he lashed out at fans. I really don't like the way he went at that. And even as somebody who, I mean, I can recognize that Von Miller, he did give us a Super Bowl, but his off-field character and antics have really, really turned me off from him these past few years, just because he does not seem like he's been the greatest person, which is a really, really stunning development, considering he seemed like a Class A citizen when he was here in Denver. But with all the legal allegations, with all the, you know, baby mama drama, he has had way too much stuff going on to the point where I think it's affecting his on-field play. And he was never an edge rusher who particularly won with power. He always won with speed, despite the fact that he still had some ridiculous power moves And there were times where he would literally just bull rush an offensive lineman, and there was nothing they could do about it. I remember those days, but he's a liability at this point for Buffalo. He's not an upgrade over Epinesa. He's not an upgrade over Rousseau, and you're just paying him way too much money. I do believe he took a slight pay cut to stay with the team, but still, I just wish that he took more of the high road, and he's taken more of the high road this past few years than he has. And going to Carolina, so now we're going to the NFC South. We are going with Adam Thielen, the wideout. Now, I actually don't know who's going to be the number 3 wide receiver for the Panthers. I don't know if it's going to be Leggett. I don't know if it's going to be Mingo. I don't know if it's going to be TMJ. But what I can say is that either of those guys are going to offer you more upside and more ceiling than what Adam Thielen does. And you can be like, yeah, well, you know, he had 1,000 yards last year. Listen, the volume doesn't make him good. It makes the Panthers a 2-15 football team. The Panthers had literally nothing behind him, and once defenses were able to key in on Adam Thielen and be like, maybe we should kind of account for this guy, they could literally do nothing. They couldn't move the ball. He was number 46 in yards per out run, number 40 in adjusted yards per out run, and number 61 in yards per target. So that shows that he really wasn't that efficient. It seemed to be a lot of empty calories. If you catch where I'm going with this, like, it just seemed like they were force-feeding him for the sake of just force-feeding him. And sure, he's a good on-field presence. Sure, he's a good locker room guy. I'm pretty sure he was elected as one of their captains last year. And I'm expecting the offense in general to just be healthier with Canales, and now that you added Deontay Johnson to give Bryce Young some sort of security blanket. But once teams, like I said, focused it on him, he couldn't win, and I think we've seen the last of Adam Thielen in the NFL. Productive player last year? Sure, but I think it showed more on the box score than it actually did on film and on Sundays. So with the Atlanta Falcons, we're going with Mike Hughes, a cornerback, and this is the only special teamer on the list that I also included too, because he was mind-bogglingly undisciplined. I remember I saw him catch wave for a fair catch at the 5-yard line. Like, why at that point, why would you not just let it bounce and just pray that it can go to the end zone? Now, I know that Minnesota, they, under Spielman, were a factory. They were a factory of trash corners, and they drafted 1 million first-round defensive backs, and it seemed like the best defensive backs for Minnesota were the guys that weren't high picks, guys like Harrison Smith, and he had a 51.8 PFF grade. Without checking rankings, that's not really something you want, especially from a starting corner. And he bounced around with Kansas City and Detroit for the past 2 years, and those are two systems that kind of catered to his strengths, where, you know, you can blitz, you can play run support, and then you just let the guys on the outside do the actual coverage. And yes, he is a decent scheme fit, but he's definitely a downgrade from D. Alford, and this is not really someone you want on the field. I know a lot of Falcons fans were really mad at what Mike Hughes offered last year, but I mean, yeah, like I said, the coaching was just bad last year. The defensive coaching was actually pretty good, all things considered, but special teams was a big yikes, and you obviously know everything about Arthur Smith as well. Now, going to the Falcons' biggest rival, we have Trevor Penning, the offensive tackle, who I believe they took 18th overall in 2022. And they have had bad luck with Ramczyk out for the season. But Carr feels like he's absolutely doomed, because when you have an older quarterback who has lost a step with his speed, you need a great offensive line. You need guys who can pass protect for days. And the Saints, by PFF, coming into this year with Ramczyk not being there and you only really having McCoy and Ruiz and a few others, it feels like this offensive line could potentially be in for a disastrous year. And he is pretty much all size, he's all athleticism, but he has zero technique, and he has not developed. And unfortunately, that's something that I think the Saints have lost ever since they lost Peyton, because Peyton was an O-line savant. Like, he can, like, I don't know what it was, but he always had his offensive lines playing at a very, very high level. But Penning, Peyton Turner, and Marcus Davenport have all been really bad picks from the Mickey Loomis era. 7 penalties, 4 sacks, 19 total pressures last year allowed on 400 snaps. He could very well start every offensive snap for the New Orleans Saints this upcoming year. So he needs to improve. Like, if they have any semblance of going anywhere next year and they have any hope for competing for the division with an aging roster, and this could probably be the last chance you get with your current core before you have to blow it all up and you don't even have a lot of cap space to make improvements to your team to begin with. I don't know. It's just a sad situation for Trevor Penning. Now, what I will say, the only time I've heard about him since he got into the NFL, besides Saints fans completely complaining about him and saying he's a turnstile, is when his rookie year, he got kicked out of practice 3 straight days. So where's his head mentally? Like, I don't know. Like, that's something I felt like that was something I should mention, just because, you know, if he gets some dumb personal foul this year, you may have to look back to that and be like, huh, that's interesting. But regardless, Trevor Penning is not developed. Oh yeah, what I wanted to say was that he's now going to be playing alongside Fuaga, but Fuaga is going to be playing on the left side. Let's hope Penning can hold up on the right side. Now, speaking of NFC South offensive linemen, we have Cody Mauch, and he's a fun story, but especially because he looks like that one guy from The Shining. But he allowed literally the most pressures at the position last year. As far as right guards, he was literally up there at number 1. And losing every other interior offensive lineman has really hurt Tampa, because you lost Kappa, you lost Jensen, you lost Marpet, and the right guard situation looks extremely difficult for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And the entire offensive line, it's semi-cohesive, but at the same time, it's not what it was a couple years ago when you had a bunch of savvy veterans. So hopefully they have a few young guys who can take steps up, like Gudecki. Hopefully Mauch can take some steps up as well. And a Miners-esque rise is not out of the equation, because this reminds me a lot of Quinn Miners' rookie year. After Quinn Miners' rookie year, I was like, okay, he's kind of like mid to bad. Granted, nowhere close to like most pressures allowed at the right guard position, but I was like, okay, this guy is relatively unimpressive. He's just like a D3 guy, whatever. But he's really coming to his own, and he was just rewarded yesterday with a 4-year, $80 million contract extension. So I know I already talked about him in this video, but I didn't agree with the pick at the time. Who did I want them to go with? Oh yeah, I wanted them to go with John Michael Schwartz, and apparently he hasn't been that good for the Giants either. So that shows how much I know about O-line talent. Tennessee Titans. This is one of the other only quarterbacks on this list, and I am talking about Will Levis and what he is now, not what he can become. Because I looked at a lot of film last year, and I saw a lot of recklessness. I saw too much trusting his arm. I saw too much of him believing that he was still in the SEC and he could make any throw. And the guys in the SEC were not as rangy. Granted, there were some great players down there, but they weren't as rangy, they weren't as athletic, and he did not have the best offensive situation. So he has a built-in excuse for why he did not perform well last year. But if he does not perform well again this upcoming year, he's out of excuses, because Tennessee invested heavily into the offense. They got Latham in the draft. They signed Cushenberry to play center in free agency. They signed Calvin Ridley in the last second in free agency. They signed Tony Pollard. So he did get some weapons, and he did get some toys to play with as far as being a quarterback. Now he finally has some things to work with. But I remember Vrabel being like, yeah, Levis probably needs to figure out a thing or two about, sliding and stuff like that. I remember one of the press conferences in particular, Vrabel was like, we showed him clips of quarterbacks sliding, and then Will Levis didn't slide today, so next time we're just going to show him clips of quarterbacks not sliding and getting absolutely drilled. And he fell in the 2023 draft. I genuinely thought he was going to be a top 10 pick. Where to? I wasn't entirely sure. But he's going to be an entertaining player in the league. He's obviously already given us that great content with the mayo coffee and the whatever he liked to do with the bananas. And yeah. Now, with the Jaguars, we have Davon Hamilton. And unfortunately, this is something that it's mainly injury related. So Peterson said the old Hamilton may be back. So that's good news, because he got a staph infection in his back last year, and he was not the same player that he had been previously. He was noticeably much less strong than what we're used to seeing from him. He was noticeably weaker. He was noticeably not as good in run support. And the Jaguars' D-line depth is pretty thin. And yeah, you have guys like Gotsis, and yeah, you have, Josh Allen Hines on the edge. But at the same time, this is someone who they need to step up, because the Jaguars, they are going to be playing in some very important games this year, and it's a really telling year for the organization. So I'm going to take a sip of Pellegrino real quick. Oh, man. Okay, but he had a 30.6 PFF grade last year, and without checking, I'm pretty sure that is the worst in the league amongst the defensive starter. So I pretty much did not have another choice as far as how to proceed and how to go with the Jacksonville Jaguars, because I wasn't going to put anything egregious on here. This was a relatively tough division, and yeah, I'll admit that this is kind of just because I had to put something on here, but unfortunately, this might be the case if he never recovers from his injury. With the Colts, we are going with Rodney Thomas, the safety. He had a very, very good rookie year. I believe he played college football at Yale. I'm not entirely sure, but for a guy who played at Yale, he made way too many mental errors. And Gus Bradley, even though I'm not a Gus Bradley truther, even though I am not a huge fan of him as a defensive coordinator, Gus Bradley literally came out and said, yeah, Rodney Thomas blew one of his coverages. And last year, the Colts secondary was an absolute disaster, because you had that guy get suspended for gambling. You had Brown, yeah, I believe his name is, lost late in the season. You had just so much turmoil and so much chaos within that unit. So he did not get complimentary corner play. On the other side of things, I felt like every time I was watching the Colts and every time we watched the Colts play football last year, it seemed like a wide receiver who was playing against the Colts was setting a record. It seemed like Nico Collins could just do whatever he wanted to. And it's not going to get any easier. Like, Stephon Diggs was just added to your division. So hopefully they can figure out the safety position. He lost his job last year to Julian Blackmon, and he's probably not going to get it back anytime soon. And I know they have Cross there as well. So they do have some capable safeties, at least some guys with upside. But man, Rodney Thomas looked absolutely brutal. And he had a 23.3 missed tackle percentage, which is absolutely atrocious. So literally every time he had a chance to make a tackle, only a quarter of the time he actually he ended up missing altogether. And he had a 93 passer rating when he was targeted. So not good, Bob. Luckily, I actually don't know if he's going to be a starter this year. So yeah, but if he is, there you go. With the Texans, Henry To'oTo'o. I did not like him at Alabama. I thought he was overrated. I remember the only game I really watched of him when he was at Alabama was when he was playing against Florida, and he missed like 80 tackles that game. I remember, was it Dameon Pierce? I think I saw Dameon Pierce just run all over him. And yeah, so he missed 80 tackles in the game against Najee and Warren this year as well, and I'm still a fan. You have to check out some amazing documentaries about this guy, because there is a lot of knowledge out there about him, and he's had a pretty good rise to the NFL, but he needs to improve. Like Henry To'oTo'o, for the Texans and for where they're supposed to be headed this upcoming offseason, they added a lot of defensive talent in the draft, which I completely agree with, because the skin and bones of your team is the of the offense, and the offensive side of the ball has largely been figured out. But for a linebacker, especially one on the inside that struggles in both run support and coverage, like the guy had literally red PFF grades in both, what is he good at? Like, because if a linebacker is not supporting in the run game and he's not giving you good pass coverage, like literally what is he providing for your team, and what is he providing for your defense on a team that's supposed to be a contender this year? Yeah, so hopefully he steps up. I do think he will. I do think he will make that leap, because he still is a young player. So yeah, that remains to be seen. But Henry To'oTo'o is a question mark in the Texans defense right now. Headed over to the NFC West, we're going with Jonah Williams. He just signed a 2-year, $30 million contract. And at this point, this is just for no reason other than the fact that the Bengals took him 11th overall in 2019. Because he came out of Alabama and he was supposed to be SEC ready. I remember everybody described him as pro ready, and everybody did that for Josh Rosen too. So maybe we should stop labeling guys as pro ready and just look at traits more. I don't know. But the Bengals, they let him walk for a reason. Like, they drafted Mims, and hopefully Mims is the answer to right tackle instead of Jonah Williams. And he has been a large part of Cincinnati's offensive line turmoil over the past few years because he has shown some flashes, but he's given up 31 sacks in 4 years, and he missed all of 2019, which was his rookie season, with an injury. And I'm curious to see how he does blocking for Kyler Murray, because Kyler Murray cannot be an easy quarterback to block for. Like, he's a guy who's naturally shorter, so he might need to roll out a little more than usual. And even if he does roll out, like, how are you going to hold up? Because we've seen, like, last year with the Broncos and Mike McGlinchey, when Russell Wilson was always rolling out to the right, that put a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on Mike McGlinchey to make the correct block, and a lot of the times it didn't work out. So even if he doesn't, if Kyler Murray starts rolling out a lot, him and Jonah Williams are going to need to figure out some chemistry. But I do respect with what the Cardinals were going for. They were just like, all right, this can be a stopgap, and we'll just see where it goes from there. But yeah, he's been part of Cincinnati's offensive line turmoil over the past few years. Hopefully he can be a good mentor for Paris Johnson. Like, that's pretty much my hope for Jonah Williams in Arizona at this point. With the Jets, or with the Seahawks, we are going with Laken Tomlinson, one who came over from the Jets. And the Seahawks offensive line in general has problems. Surprise, surprise. If you look at every PFF ranking, if you look at every ESPN ranking, you'll notice that coming into this year, the Seahawks offensive line is expected to be one of the very worst in the league. Like, what else is new? And Tomlinson, Harris, Bradford, and Lucas all posted poor grades. That's your left guard, your center, your right guard, and your projected right tackle as well. And the offensive line could absolutely sink the Seahawks this year. I think they're going to be pretty stout because of the Mike McDonald hire, and just because that's a lot more progressive as opposed to what the Seahawks had been seeing with Pete Carroll as head coach. And Jets fans absolutely hate Laken Tomlinson, which is really weird considering you'd think that when you are a Jets offensive lineman for a group that's been very injury prone over the past few years, you'd think that you find one guy who can stay healthy, the entire fan base is like, yay. But no, they were actively excited to see him go to Seattle. And he was a Pro Bowl guard next to Trent Williams, but he was complete garbage without. And now Charles Cross has a tall order to fill. Like, can you replicate the play of Trent Williams? I mean, that'd be unrealistic to expect, but hopefully that Cross can give some big play, some great play, so that Tomlinson doesn't have to revert back to his old ways and just be overall a non-contributor to this offensive line. Now the Rams, Tyler Higbee. I feel like being a tight end in the McVay offense, especially with Stafford, should be an absolute gimme, but his efficiency was bad last year. I hope he heals up because he did take that pretty nasty hit from Kirby Joseph in the wildcard game, but it just feels like the Rams can do better at this position, and the Rams aren't entirely sold on him either. They tried to go up for Brock Bowers in the draft, and yeah, sure, maybe Higbee can be the placeholder while you're still trying to develop Bowers, but McVay, if they were to get their hands on a tight end like Bowers, like, they would have him playing right away, and I'm pretty sure that Higbee would not see the field again for a while. But Davis Allen, in my opinion, he looked better in the limited sample that we saw, especially towards the end of the year. I thought Davis Allen did look better than Tyler Higbee, and one thing that stuck out to me about Higbee is he's a pretty bad red zone threat for such a big, and I mean, I know I actually tried to check his combine numbers, but he didn't test because he was hurt. But I feel like he's pretty athletic, so yeah, once again, just feels like the Rams can do better here. He's not like your worst option, and if he is your worst starter on the team, you're doing pretty all right, especially because you're starting a lot of guys on the defensive side of the ball that do have a lot of potential. But ultimately, Higbee is the lame known commodity, and that's kind of the reason why I went with him for this selection. With the 49ers, we have Colt McKivitz. Now, McKivitz replacing McGlinchey was a huge problem for the San Francisco 49ers down the stretch last year. 9 sacks allowed and 47 pressures. Those are both amongst the worst in the offensive line, or as far as offensive line rankings throughout the NFL. And he allowed 12 pressures in the playoffs, 1 sack, I believe, against Green Bay. and he was one of the worst offensive linemen in the league as far as pass blocking efficiency. And the 49ers, they have a very strong roster. They've built outwards rather than inwards, meaning they've built the skill position guys. They've built the trenches, at least on the defensive side of the ball. They've built the secondary. So they have a great roster in pretty much every other area besides the offensive line. And hopefully they can play cohesively, because I truly believe that if Purdy has one more second in the Super Bowl, one more, to find Brandon Ayuk, who was given L'Jarius Sneed the work that day, then things turn out differently. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. So they have to figure out a way to get back there again with the same offensive line, and I'm just not optimistic. Hopefully McKivitz can improve, because ultimately you are not just some guy who can stay stagnant in the NFL. Like, players can improve, players can get better. There's a lot of players like who would have been on this list a few years ago who are now getting big contracts and now great players in this league. And hopefully McKivitz can follow in those footsteps for the San Francisco 49ers. Speaking of more bad offensive linemen, we have Andre James, and this is mainly due to the fact that whenever I watched the Raiders last year, I live in Vegas. I don't like the team, but I do watch a lot of their games. He had too many botch snaps. I swear, it happened like twice a game. And he signed a 3-year, $24 million extension this past year. So he's not getting like a record-setting contract or anything like that. He's not getting like a market deal either. That is kind of a hometown discount, especially for a second contract player. But PFF ranked him as the 9th best center in the league, and a lot of industry experts are like, nah, this guy's legit. Then a lot of Raider fans are like, are you kidding me? This guy's trash. But I do think that eventually Jackson Powers Johnson is going to be the guy who takes over center for the Las Vegas Raiders. And the contract, it does have it out in 2026. So even if he is trash this year, I mean, he's probably going to be, rotting on the bench for next year. But ultimately, for a veteran signal caller, for a guy up front who has been a veteran in your locker room for many years at the center position, you really can't ask for much more. And it's a very underrated position, because the center outside of the quarterback are two guys who will touch the ball on any given game. Like, any play that happens in the game, it's going through either the center or the long snapper. So yeah, that's my rationale for why Andre James is ranked up here for the Raiders. They do have a good offensive line. At least they performed well at the end of last year, especially being anchored by Miller and a few other guys. But still, Andre James is my most overrated player. For the Chargers, we have Quentin Johnston. Make no mistake about it, disastrous year. And coming into last year, I was like, okay, I'm factoring in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are going to miss at least half the season. I didn't want to predict any injuries or anything like that. I was just like, all right, these two guys have had really big problems staying healthy over the past few years. Like, Quentin Johnston is at least going to have the field to himself and, the top of the wide receiver room to himself for a while. And guess what? That happened. Mike Williams went down very early last year, and Keenan Allen was pretty much all they had at the wide receiver position, and Herbert peppered him with targets, like absolutely obliterated him with targets. But when you cannot get on the field and your only competition for touches is Josh Palmer, and you are not getting the ball thrown your way, maybe we can realize that this guy is just not that good. And maybe he wasn't used in the correct way. I don't know. But Reception Perception did sampling on him, and he had a disastrous rookie year. One of the worst ever in NFL history as far as beating man coverage. And I expect Quentin Johnston to see the field significantly less this year. I think Lab McConkey and Palmer are going to be the two wide receivers that they're going to deploy. And I expect, since they do have a lack of true receiving threats on the team and a true lack of skill position guys in general, I expect Harbaugh to run the ball with Edwards and Kamani Vidal and maybe Dobbins if he can stay healthy as well. But the guy has bad hands. He can't run good routes either. And at TCU, he was supposed to be like this raw, monstrous, like, ceiling guy. And Rashee Rice had the year that I was kind of predicting that Quentin Johnston would have last year. So yeah. With the Broncos, we're going to go with Riley Moss. So I know he is still in a camp battle for the cornerback 2 job, but he was the 3rd round pick last year who tore his, I believe, torso early in the preseason, but he couldn't even seem to get on the field when he was healthy. I think he played like a total of like 20 defensive snaps last year. He contributed on special teams, sure, but when you're in the third round, when you're picking in the third round for a team that was already thin on capital to begin with and had a lot of holes on the roster, you're hoping that a guy can do more than just contribute on special teams. And the team didn't have great corner depth last year either. They were starting Isang Bassi, who was not that good. That experiment absolutely failed in tremendous fashion. They had Kareem Jackson, who was absolutely washed and could not stop laying the boom and getting suspended and getting fined. You had Fabian Moreau, who, yeah, he was kind of an upgrade at the cornerback 2 spot, but yeah. So he's in a position battle this year with Levi Wallace, and if he can't beat out Levi Wallace, he is in big trouble for what is going to spell his NFL career. Like, he could be a career special teamer, and there's nothing wrong with that because he was very contributive on special teams last year. But at the same time, when you're using a third-round pick on a cornerback, when that's basically like a second-round pick for this team since they didn't have one in 2023. So yeah, Jawaan Taylor, I was very excited for him coming out of Florida. Like, I was like, oh my god, this guy's absolutely amazing. I had him as probably my third best prospect in that whole class after Quinnen Williams and Kyler Murray, and Nick Bosa. I literally had him above Kyler Murray as a prospect, and I understand why they gave him 4 years and $80 million, but last season was bad. It's really not what you want out of your right tackle, especially when you have your job to protect Patrick Mahomes, and you have so many guys on the Chiefs who are just perennially underpaid and perennially just contributing, and they're not going to bench Jawaan Taylor because, once again, the team investment is way too high, and offensive line chemistry and cohesion and all that matters significantly at that unit or whatever. But there were only 3 games last year where he graded decently in PFF by run blocking. 3 whole games where he was in the green. The rest, I swear, was either like 50 or below. So yeah, bad run blocker. He was all right as far as pass protection, but once again, 47 pressures is way too many. And the one thing that like made my eyes go like this is 20 penalties. I don't even know how that's possible, even in a 17-game season. But yeah, the rest of the offensive line is good. Smith, Humphrey, and Tooney, that's kind of a crumble-proof interior, but still. Jawaan Taylor has just not lived up to that contract so far. Now, with Quay Walker, the linebacker out of Georgia, I had really high hopes for him coming out. I thought he was going to be an absolute stud. I thought he was going to be an absolute beast. But he has been nothing more than a replacement level off-ball linebacker, and he looks lost in coverage. He has a 52.6 PFF grade, and he can't shed blocks in the run game either. So once again, if you are a linebacker who can't cover, and you're a linebacker who can't shed blocks, like, what are you good for? I will acknowledge he's a very, very good tackler. Like, he's probably one of the cleanest tacklers in the NFL right now, and he is a very toolsy guy. Like, the Packers, they do love their just athletic freaks on the defensive side of the ball. That's typically where they spend their first-round picks, even though they drafted Morgan in the first this year, which, I mean, I guess it makes sense to protect Jordan Love. But one thing that really sticks out to me about Quay Walker is he going to stop committing egregious penalties? Because off the top of my head, against Buffalo in that one Monday Night Football game, against Detroit in that one Sunday Night Football, like, win or go home game for Green Bay, and then this past year on Thursday Night Football again, week 4 against Detroit, what do? You completely commit an egregious penalty, and that's the one thing that I have to say about him. That's the one question I have. Can he stop taking egregious penalties? And here's the deal, my man. If you're going to commit these penalties, if you're going to, like, shove a Lions trainer, get your money's worth. Like, throw him to the ground, man. Like, I don't know. It was kind of frustrating to me that he was, trying to be discreet about it. Like, bro, push him, shove him to the ground. If you're going to do it, like, either do it or don't, man. So, yeah. With this one, we have Gervon Dexter, the interior defensive lineman for the Chicago Bears. And I need to address one thing. He has potential. This was another very, very tough decision, and I expect this to look a lot different next year if I do end up making this list. And I did consider Nate Davis, but once again, he's a veteran, and he did have some personal things going on. So I felt it would have been disingenuous to put Dexter on this list. And once again, the Bears have a lot of guys. Like, this was not an easy choice, but here's the deal. The inconsistently for the entire defensive line in general, but especially Dexter, was maddening. He looked great at points, but he had a lot of bad games. And he does have a decent amount of potential, but it feels like the expectations are too high because I don't even remember him doing anything without Sweat. And the majority of his production came when Sweat was already on the team. Now, one thing that's good for you is that Sweat is going to be on this team going into next year. But I still wish I would have seen a little more just individually. I still wish I would have gotten a bigger sample of him just being able to wreck the game. And he does have great potential. He does have great potential, but again, if everything else isn't firing on all cylinders, like if they don't get great defensive line play again, like if Walker takes a step back, you never know. If Edwards and Edmonds, they can't do their job in the front seven, then this unit could look absolutely lost again. And coached by Matt Eberflus could look like the downsides are, what's the ceiling? What's the ceiling for a downside? Like, that's what I'm thinking. Like, the floor is very, very low. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, we're going to take another swig break again. Ugh. So, yeah. I know that in my ranking backups video, I considered Sam Darnold a backup, but ultimately he is going to start week 1 for the Minnesota Vikings. And I just did that so I wasn't comparing J.J. McCarthy to veteran established backups. But going into week 1, Sam Darnold's almost certainly going to be the backup for the Minnesota Vikings. I believe his odds are like minus 200 by Vegas at this point. And he has had an absolutely brutal career after being picked 3rd overall. The Jets can't develop anybody. They have not been, the pride and joy of developing quarterbacks in the NFL. And yeah, you can argue that he got completely overdrafted. You can argue that the Jets even ruined him, but he was never that toolsy to begin with. He had a sharp mind, don't get me wrong, but athletically, I don't know. And he had a sharp mind at USC, but it seems like that's taken a step back through the NFL. And mechanically, he's a disaster. I don't even know why the 49ers brought him in. Actually, that's disingenuous because I literally put on here that I could see why Shanahan brought him in. But at the same time, for these low floor and medium ceiling backups, why did you not just keep Lance? I know they wanted to give Lance a shot to start somewhere else, but Darnold is now going to be starting for Minnesota, at least in week 1. But I predict that McCarthy is going to be in here sooner rather than later because highly drafted quarterbacks, they just find their way onto the field. It's just what happens. Now, Addison and Jefferson, they might be in for a very rough year with a quarterback downgrade. You're going from Kirk Cousins, who was not only a good quarterback, but one that threw the ball 50 times a game. Kevin O'Connell was willing to scheme up 40, 45 passes a game. And I don't really think you want Sam Darnold throwing the ball 40, 45 times a game. And I think that we're going to see J.J. McCarthy sooner rather than later. So speaking of Kirby Joseph, people are going to be really mad at me for this ranking, especially Lions fans, but here's what we have to do. Here's what I have to say. So he had an incredible rookie year. I don't know why I just put incredible year. So I need to clarify that. He had an incredible rookie year, but he has failed to capitalize on it. And he was very uninvolved based on the way the Lions were involved schematically last year. They just had him playing super, super deep, so there wasn't really a lot for him to do. And the coverage in the back end, the communication was just not that good. And the secondary should be better, especially because they added Terrion Arnold, they added Ennis Rakestraw in the draft. So that was the one area of the team that needed a lot of improvement. And Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, they went out and they drafted 2 corners. So that shows that they were on top of it. They really wanted to improve the secondary. And he plays with a lot of emotion, but I remember that thing about him, getting, it was just weird. I was working at the time, but I remember seeing him, talk to CD or something like that. It didn't make sense to me when they were playing the Cowboys. But yeah. So, Joseph, I do believe he's the worst starter on the Detroit Lions. Absolutely loaded team, and there's nothing wrong with that, and he can develop. That's all I really have to say about Kirby Joseph. So, once again, this was one of the most difficult choices on this list, and Judy by no means is he a bad player, but he's had some attitude problems throughout his career. When Denver couldn't get him the football, he tweeted, "Oh, I was glad I got my cardio in," and obviously he had that situation where his baby mama, locked his wallet in his car, so yeah, I don't really know what was happening there, but he had played 5 games of football living up to his draft pedigree ever. Literally, the end of 2022, he had a great finish to what was a disastrous year for Denver. But I thought the extension they gave him, 3 years, $58 million, complete joke for what he offers to your team, because he is not a slot receiver. He is a boomer bust outside deep threat. He is an overrated route runner. Like, he can run some great routes against man coverage, but he can't find anything against zone. I believe that he's like a bottom 5th percentile zone beater in the NFL if you look at his reception perception, but he's been absolutely murderous versus man. He's murderous versus press. So hopefully, I do think that if there's one guy who can utilize him to the best of his ability, it's Kevin Stefanski, and he'll notice that, okay, this guy is not very good against zone, but maybe we can throw him on the outside one-on-one against man coverage, and we'll see how he does. And Judy, he has wheels, so hopefully that he's able to cook the defenders in that way, especially in the AFC North, because I think there's a lack of innovation as far as passing in that whole division. Just the way the division's set up and the way every team wants to run the ball and play good defense. But hey, if you get ahead of the curve, then you could set yourself up really nicely. But regardless, Judy, he's somebody who has not panned up to his draft status, unfortunately. I remember how astronomical the hype was in summer 2019 for him. I remember people being like, okay, he might be one of the best wide receiver prospects like ever. And then it turns out that CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson were the jewels of that class. So DJ Turner, Nick Scott, he would have been the easy choice if he didn't get, if he didn't get cut. But losing Bates and Bell, a very, very good safety tandem, was extremely tough for the Cincinnati Bengals. And Turner came in and he performed like a rookie. And unfortunately, he is reportedly losing the cornerback 2 battle behind Cam Taylor-Britt. Apparently, he's losing that to Dax Hill in free agency, and that's not good. So I still have faith that, playing in Lou Anarumo's defense, that he can develop, because ultimately, this coaching staff is really high on him. He's very athletic, he's very toolsy, and I'm not going to sit here and say that he is definitively the worst starter on the Cincinnati Bengals, but at the same time, I would have liked to have seen a little more. Like, that's literally all it is, and I think he was put in a tough situation last year because the entire defense regressed. Like, Hubbard regressed, Reader regressed, so that was an extremely tough situation for the Bills, or no, not the Bills, for the Bengals to be involved with in the first place, and yeah. So, speaking of corners from the AFC North, Cameron Sutton, he had a disastrous year in Detroit. Pittsburgh is probably very happy to have him back, but I can't imagine he ends up starting a game for this team, especially not over Joey Porter Jr. and not over Dante Jackson. He gave up 1,100 yards last year and 8 touchdowns, so that's literally like if he lined up against DK Metcalf. Like, the opposing wide receiver he was lined up against in man coverage was DK Metcalf. That was DK Metcalf's whole stat line last year, and that's basically what happens if you threw your receiver on offense in front of Cameron Sutton. So yeah, he was burnt toast in the secondary, and then he got suspended for 8 games because of that legal situation. Not really sure what's going on there, but as somebody who's, very empathetic with all these NFL players when it comes to stuff like that, I hope that he can get the help he needs. I hope that he can be the best version of himself, and hopefully he can, immerse himself in the Steeler way and everything like that, but it's not looking good, boys. With the Baltimore Ravens, we have Rashad Bateman, and unfortunately, this isn't like he's a horrible player or anything like that, but once again, he just has not lived up to his hype since the 2021 draft. And he's been often injured and very much part of the Ravens wide receiver struggles the past 3 years. Before we had the Chiefs, people were mocking the Ravens wide receiver room because all they had was Hollywood Brown and what else? Like, that was pretty much it. And he's an amazing separator. Rashad Bateman is an incredible separator. Like, if you look at any chart as far as how good a guy is at yak or separation, Rashad Bateman's always going to be up there. But guess what? To play at the wide receiver position, especially in a Lamar Jackson offense, where you're not really going to get the ball a whole lot, where you're not going to get the ball too terribly much because you're, at best, the third option in the passing game behind Zay Flowers, and you're the third option behind Mark Andrews. And that's not even including the fact that Lamar Jackson's going to be running and Derrick Henry's Derrick Henry's going to be running, but he has just never developed that chemistry with Lamar Jackson, and unfortunately, I just don't think it happens in Baltimore. I know he just got extended, but I think that if he really wanted to take off and he really wanted his career to go somewhere, he should have gone elsewhere. He should have gone somewhere where running was not the priority, and he should have gone to a coaching staff that would have known how to utilize his strengths. Like I don't know, what team would have been good for him? Maybe Washington, because I don't know how Cliff Kingsbury would utilize his strengths, but at least you'd have an opportunity to take over there. And, you know, running is not the main priority of that team, especially with Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator. So, yeah, that's where I think he should have gone. Yeah, so basically insert any Brandon Ayuk trade destination and just think about if Rashad Bateman was thrown in that situation instead. So think about like Pittsburgh or Washington or yeah. So that basically does it for me. And I hope you guys enjoyed. I really enjoyed making this. It took me a lot of time, so I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Leave a like if you did. So yeah, I will see you guys next time. Hit the outro.